We are in Omaha, Nebraska for a conversation with Warren Buffett. Like so many people, I got up this morning in New York and read the New York Times editorial page, and I found the following column written by him. It is an op-ed which is called "Stop Coddling the Super Rich." Here are some excerpts. Our leaders have asked for shared sacrifice, but when they did the asking, they spared me. I checked with my mega-rich friends to learn what pain they were expecting. They too were left untouched. While the poor and middle class fight for us in Afghanistan, and while most Americans struggle to make ends meet, we mega-rich continue to get our extraordinary tax breaks. Buffett speaks directly to the newly designated 12-member Supercommittee of Congress, outlining the stakes for the country. Americans are rapidly losing faith in the ability of Congress to deal with our country's fiscal problems. Only action that is immediate, real, and very substantial will prevent that doubt from morphing into hopelessness. That feeling can create its own reality. He spoke to spending as well as taxes, saying, "Job one for the 12 is to pare down some future promises that even a rich America can't fulfill. Big money must be saved here." And then he turned to his theme of taxes on the rich. The 12 should then turn to the issue of revenues. I would leave rates for 99.7% of taxpayers unchanged and continue the current 2 percentage point reduction in the employee contribution to the payroll tax. His argument is specific. For those making more than $1 million, there were 236,883 of them in 2009. I would raise rates immediately on taxable income in excess of $1 million, including, of course, dividends and capital gains. And for those who make $10 million or more, there were 8,274 in 2009. I would suggest an additional increase in rate. So there it is. At a time of great political debate about taxes and spending, one of the richest people in the world looks at his country and says, people like him should pay more taxes. Warren Buffett joins me now to talk about this column, the U.S. economy, the global economy, the deficit and the debt, and what he thinks we should do about taxes. I am pleased to have another conversation with my friend Warren Buffett. Welcome.
Good to see you, Charlie.
All right, this is not a new idea for you.
No, it's not a new idea. I've done this 3 times in terms of checking in my office, and every time I come out to be the low taxpayer, but this time I got a little more upset than usual.
So you got more upset and decided you wanted to write and express what central idea?
Well, we've been hearing about shared sacrifice, and believe me, the people out there know what they're talking about on that. I mean, there is sacrifice going on all over this country, and we're talking about people making sacrifices about the promises that have been made to them in the future on some entitlements. So I decided to look around and see if any of my friends were being affected by shared sacrifice, and they, like me, are enjoying these extremely low tax rates, and in the very high percentage of the cases, the very rich are paying less in the way of taxes than the people to clean their offices.
Between a 10-year period, and the rich, the rate they were paying has gone down, and more of them have a much larger taxable income.
Yeah, well, the IRS publishes statistics. They've done that since 1992, about the top 400 earners in the country. It's not the same every year. Those earners have had their income since 1992 quintupled. Now, I don't know very many of our listeners that are going to have had their earnings quintupled. During that same period, their tax rates have gone down from 29.5% overall to 21.5%.
You're also in favor of spending cuts.
We have to, Charlie. I mean, we are a very, very, very rich country. We've got close to, $48,000 of GDP per capita. If you'd told me when I was a kid that would happen, I would have thought you'd lost your marbles. But even a rich country has limits, and we have promised things that we can't deliver on, and that's a mistake. But we're also in the process undertaxing the very rich. What I propose, incidentally, would not touch the taxes of 99.7%. I'm talking about 0.3% of the American public. But the people from $1 million on up, I think, should be asked to share in a little of the sacrifice that we're all being asked to share.
What's the formula you're looking for?
Well, I think what really gives the low rates to the very rich like me is the low tax on dividends and capital gains. If you take these rich people that the IRS singles out from 1992, they've almost had a tenfold increase in capital gains. They've had a tenfold increase almost in dividends. And those are taxed at 15%. And there's no payroll tax on it. Now, the payroll tax accounts for almost as much revenue to the government as the income tax. It's close. 800 billion plus on payroll taxes last year and about 900 billion on income taxes. That's where the money comes from in Washington. And they don't get any payroll tax to speak of on my income. I've got my tax return here.
We're going to take a look at them in a moment.
and I get taxed on up to 100,000, and my super rich friends get taxed up to 100,000, and that tax hits the people in my office very, very hard. Often they have a spouse working, so they get taxed on up to $200,000, that payroll tax, and that's at. This year we've had a waiver of 2 points, but that's normally at 15.3%. That alone is higher than the tax rate on capital gains or dividends.
You point out that the average tax rate for people in your audience, the average rate for people in your office is 36% of taxable income.
36%, and nobody's below 33%. And incidentally, the lowest income person in the office is higher than the 33. They don't have the low rate. So from 33 to 41 they range, and they average 36, and I'm in there with a fat 17.4, I think it is.
And why is that?
Well, it taxes, if you make money with money, you get taxed at very low rates, 15% dividends and capital gains, no payroll tax. If you make money with muscle or hard work or sweat of your brow, you get taxed at rates that move on up. And most of the people, the middle class, gets taxed at rates of either 15 or 25 on their income tax, but then they get really hit hard on the payroll tax, and that's what brings the rates in our office up to an average of 36% if you leave me out.
What has happened to the tax rates for the lowest 20%?
The poor don't pay any. I mean, there's 80 plus million actual taxpayers that pay tax. Incidentally, some of the extremely wealthy don't pay, but that's an aberration. But no, the taxes are falling. The high rates are falling on the middle class and the upper middle class.
The argument is sometimes made by people who believe that it is always good economic policy to reduce taxes, that if in fact you reduce taxes, you will create economic expansion and economic growth. People will go out and create jobs if they're not paying as much tax. People, if they're paying a higher tax, will not make as many investments.
Well, I worked with investors for 60 years, small ones, large ones, super large ones. Yeah. I have yet, and I've worked with capital gains rates of 39.9% and 36% and 25%. I have yet to hear one person say to me, if I call you in the middle of the night, Charlie, and I say, Charlie, I've got this hot investment idea, your reaction is not to say, no matter what the tax rate, forget it, I'm going back to sleep because the capital gains rates are too high. No, what you're going to do is you're going to say, tell me the name Quick Warren before I change your mind. You know? And I have never had one person decline to invest with me. And I was running money 40, 50 years ago when rates were much higher. And I never had one person that showed the slightest reluctance to take an investment idea and run with it.
What are the other reasons that is essential to do now?
Well, I think it is essential. I think people are very, very upset about how their government works, and particularly how it worked during this raising the deficit ceiling period. I mean, so as I talk to people, they're very disillusioned. Howard Schultz of Starbucks came out with an article just the other day on that. So I think it's important that whatever is done restores to a degree, and can't do it overnight, but restores to a degree people's faith in the fact that their government can work. Now, I also think fairness is important, and I think getting rid of promises that you can't keep is important. I don't think we should cut spending dramatically now. I don't think that what I'm talking about on taxes solves the deficit gap at all, but I think fairness is important. I think having a sensible long-term plan is important to explain, and I think having it be believable is terribly important, because people don't believe these out-year things generally with Congress. They've seen too much of what's happened.
Is part of this, being in the position that you're in, you want to start a conversation about the reality of taxes?
Sure.
And the reality of balance and fairness?
Yeah, I think the American people deserve to be educated on what fellows like me are paying in taxes, for example. But they have to be educated on the reality of future promises. They have to be educated on the necessity of running significant deficits when the economy is weak. I mean, there's a lot of things in terms of economic education. But this is the time to do it. If we don't do it now, if these 12 members who have been appointed now to the super committee, if they come back with something that's a lot of mush, you know, the American public's had it.
And what happens to the country?
It isn't good. It isn't good. The country will still come through. Believe me, we'll rise to whatever occasion the occasion demands eventually. But we are wasting so much in the way of potential output in terms of the opportunities for people that we ought to get on with it. I mean, the job of government is to govern.
Let me go to the debt ceiling debate and just talk about it for a moment.
It's just like, let's just say, Charlie, that you and I agreed that after we left the studio here, we were going to go out to a track near here, and I was going to get at one end with my car, and you're going to get at the other end, and there's this line down the middle, and whichever one flinches loses his net worth to the other guy. Do you want to play?
Yeah.
Whether you want to play depends on how crazy you think I am.
Yeah.
So what do we do if we go out there? Your net worth's on the line, my net worth's on the line, the engines are revved up, you know. And I make all these menacing gestures at you. I try to look like a
You make me think you're crazy.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you're trying to make me think you're crazy. And we both get in our cars and we don't think the other guy's crazy.
Yeah.
So what do? Yeah. Right as the engines start, I throw out my steering wheel. Now you believe me, right? Well, Boehner didn't throw out the steering wheel, McConnell didn't throw out the steering wheel, but a group behind them said, throw out the steering wheel, Mr. Speaker, and make those people realize that we're not going to agree to anything that, you know, unless we get our way. And if you have a sane person dealing with somebody that you feel may be insane, by the point that when they throw out the steering wheel, you feel they're insane, you lose. And the American people lost, incidentally.
Then along came Standard & Poor's and basically downgraded.
Yeah.
Because they said it appears that the U.S. Congress is dysfunctional and unable to deal with the issue. Yeah. You disagree with the downgrading?
100%. I mean,
but you understand why they made the
decision?
decision?
I understand why they did it. But I will bet you McGraw-Hill owns Standard & Poor's.
Right.
I'll bet you if they have any short-term money around, it's in treasuries. I don't know that for sure, but they would not be worried about it that being in treasuries.
And that's in fact what happened. Treasuries
are strong out. We can print money. You know, there's 17 countries in Europe that gave up the right to print money, and believe me, they know what it means to give up the right to print money.
Because they joined the Eurozone.
Yeah, they joined the Eurozone, and now they've got terrible problems because they can't print money. We can print money, so we don't have to worry so much about our government becoming dysfunctional as we have to worry about that damn printing press becoming dysfunctional for some reason.
In fact, you were saying that the United States can always pay its bills, and therefore it should not have had its AAA rating downgraded.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. But what do you make of the Chinese criticism?
Well, I'm sure they're enjoying it in a way. I mean, well, I would criticize too, because if I were the Chinese sitting with $1 trillion plus of U.S. government obligations one way or another, I would be very worried about what's going to happen to the purchasing power of that. I mean, I've got the right to get the $1 trillion back, and I will get the $1 trillion back. The question is what will it buy at that time? And our government gives you the impression at times that if they will resort to a printing press, they'll resort to a printing press if necessary. And if they do enough of that, the value of the dollar goes down, and it goes down significantly. So if you hold a lot of dollars, which the Chinese do, I can see getting very unhappy about that.
What do you think of the Federal Reserve's announcement they're going to keep interest rates low?
Well, that's a very, very stark statement. I mean, the Fed is saying, when they say we're going to keep rates low until 2013, that they say they're really saying the economy's not going to be very good until then. It's an unusual statement.
Which you disagree with?
I think there's a chance they're wrong. Yeah, I think it may pick up before then.
You think the U.S. economy will pick up?
Yeah, the U.S. economy is. I think it's been picking up ever since the summer of 2009, right up till last month. I mean, I see figures on 70 plus businesses. What is unusual about this is we had a huge recession caused in large part by a housing bubble. I mean, you have 67% of the people in the United States own their own homes, roughly. Right. And those people who had a $22 trillion asset at the peak saw its value shrink dramatically. That's affecting 2/3 of the households in the United States. That had that incredible impact on the economy, and we won't come back big time until we've worked off the excess inventory that was created during our binge on housing a few years back. We are making progress on that every day, every week, every month. I mean, we are producing less houses than we are households.
household formation has to increase beyond the
housing construction,
housing construction,
and that's been happening for a couple of years, and it's exactly what should happen. Now, I actually read some article the other day about people talking about blowing up a few houses or something. If you blew up a million houses, you'd probably be in balance now. Right. I'm not advocating that. And if you started having households being formed by 12-year-olds, you could speed up household formation. But we're not going to have that either. But we are going to have households being formed. That's baked into the demographic pie.
You are saying that what's wrong with the American economic growth picture right now is housing and construction, right. and
every one of our businesses, virtually of our 70-some businesses, are doing better quarter by quarter by quarter, except those tied to housing.
But housing and things like
housing is way bigger than construction workers. Unemployment will fall significantly, in my view, when we get back up to 1 million housing starts. Because it won't just be construction workers. It will be our carpet workers, where we've laid off 6,000 people. It will be our brick workers, and go up and down the line. So the big recovery, we've recovered on corporate profits. We've recovered in terms of getting the banks back in shape. Banks are in good shape now. We've recovered in all kinds of areas. Corporate America is doing fine in most areas. It's not doing fine in things tied to residential construction. That won't come back until we work off the excess inventory. But the inventory is not as, the amount of excess inventory is not as high as a lot of people think, in my judgment. And that's why I say it could be before mid-2013.
Going down to 8% or something?
I think when home construction is 1 million units or more, running at that rate, I think we'll be at 7% or below.
You have a bet with Peter Orzog, the former director of the Office of Management Budget?
Yeah, but I'm talking settlement with
him. What was the bet?
The bet was on, by election time, that it would be down to 7.3%. And I thought housing construction would come back by that point. Yeah. And I may be wrong. I may be right, but but I will guarantee you, when housing construction gets back to 1 million units, and it can go beyond that. I mean, it could easily be 1 million too. We will have, unemployment will fall dramatically.
To 6% at some point?
Yeah, certainly below 7.
Below, well, close to 6.
Yeah.
By 2013.
Oh, I think it's likely to happen. The Federal Reserve disagrees with me, and Bernanke's a lot smarter guy about that than I am. But we are working it off. I mean, we have never had this low a level relative to population for as long as I know the figures on. I mean, this is a huge correction of a bubble that popped.
And what is necessary to take place over the next 2 years in order to increase household formation and decrease the amount of construction?
Well, we're doing pretty well on the decrease of construction.
Right.
We've not done.
Demand is a factor in that.
Demand's a factor, and we artificially gave it a little boost when we went with the credit, a year or two ago on purchase of homes. I think it's a mistake to try and front end it. I mean, it just delays the eventual recovery. If you've got an excess of something, if I've got too many purple dresses and I run a dress shop, I get rid of those purple dresses, and then I can start all over again with the dresses that the people want, and I mark them down to whatever it takes. You could have a bunch of rich immigrants come in, and they'd all need houses, for example. I mean, if you wanted to change your immigration policy so that you let 500,000 families in, but they had to have a significant net worth and everything, you'd solve things very quickly. But naturally, it's being solved. Capitalism is solving this. What we're fortunate in is Japan has a declining population. I mean, if they get an excess of something, it isn't going to get worked off. We have households being formed every day. I've got a grandson getting married this weekend. So we're forming them all the time. And we're forming them a lot faster than we're building homes.
And we have an economy that's based on domestic demand?
Sure.
Yeah. Whereas China was trying to shift around from an export demand to a domestic demand.
Yeah, they'll be a strong exporter for a long time.
When you look at economic growth, first there's a job question, but then there's also the rate of economic growth, the increase in GDP. How do you see that?
I think it'll be very good over time. I mean, we have the same things that have been working for us for 200 plus years. Charlie, I was born on August 30th, 1930. That was the high day of the Dow Industrials in that year. It was at 242. They'd come back. People thought they didn't think that we were going into a recession. What happened the next couple of years? At 4,000, banks closed. The Dow went to 41. That's like the present Dow going to 2,000. My dad lost his job. We had the Dust Bowl here and everything. We're living 6 times better than then now. The American system works. It works terrifically. And it has occasional recessions. I mean, we've probably had 15 of them since the country was formed. And this was a particularly bad one because we had a bubble in the biggest asset around for the American public.
You have made the point that I guess it was in 1779 or somewhere right about then, that the Chinese population was like 290 million.
Yeah, 290 million.
The American population was about 4 million, and Europe's was about 50 million.
Yeah.
And look what happened.
Look what happened. And we weren't smarter. We didn't work harder. We didn't have greater natural resources. We just had a system that worked, and they've been smart enough to catch on.
Okay, but there are interesting things that are at work as well. The demographics are at work. So they have more domestic demand possibilities in China because of their population, or in India because of their population, or in Brazil and places like that. Some will argue that it's going to be a much more competitive environment for the United States. While we may have a system, other people are learning from our system, and they also have some built-in advantages that we don't have.
Yeah, they've gotten smarter about things. I mean, if you go back 50 years in China, the Chinese were just as smart then. They worked just as hard, but they weren't getting results. And now they're getting incredible results. They picked up on the system, but that's not bad for us. I mean, we do not, the world isn't a zero-sum game at all. We want the rest of the world to prosper. We'll sell them a lot of things. You know, most people don't realize it, but our exports as a percentage of GDP have doubled in the last 40 years. You know, we have become better at exporting things, but just we like to import a lot better.
Two big debates coming up in terms of this country and a political season. One is about taxes, which you are speaking to in this piece, basically saying the rich ought to pay more. The other is the role of government. How do you see that debate?
Well, I think if we get back on more or less the formula we had, which was getting 18.5 or 19% of our revenues from taxes, we can spend 21% then. We can run a deficit of a couple percent of GDP on average over time because our country will grow, and we have a lot more debt-paying capacity than we had back in 1790. Just like I've got more debt-paying capacity than I had 50 years ago. So as your income grows, your population grows, your wealth grows, you can handle more debt, but you can't let it keep increasing as a percentage of your income or wealth, and which is what we've been doing like crazy lately. So I don't mind a couple percentage point gap. 18.5 or 19 on revenues, 21 or thereabouts on expenditure. But that means we have to hit both sides, and we can't put ourselves on a trajectory that takes the expenditure side up automatically as the years pass, which is what we've done with entitlements.
Do we need another stimulus program?
Well, we've got the biggest stimulus program the world's seen virtually going on right now. That debate is really gotten somewhat ridiculous in my view, because fiscal stimulus is when the government spends a lot more than it's taking in.
So the deficit is our stimulus.
The deficit is our stimulus. You can say a bridge someplace is part of that act. You can say cutting taxes is part of it, as was the case in our Stimulus Act. But the stimulus is the government pouring more money out than it's taking in. And we have a stimulus going on that's 10% of GDP, which we haven't seen since World War II. So we have a huge stimulus going on. Nobody wants to call it a stimulus because that's gotten to be a dirty word, but we have a big stimulus. We do, in my view, whether we have a 10% of GDP deficit, right, which is a huge stimulus, or a 12 or an 8 doesn't make much difference. I think that we've pushed monetary policy to the limit, we've pushed fiscal policy to the limit, but fortunately, the most important thing in terms of this country ever coming out of recessions has been the natural workings of capitalism, and I think you've seen that the last couple of years.
And you are saying at this table this day you do not see the likelihood of a double-dip recession, because the only thing that needs to happen to make this economy as strong as it is new construction.
Yeah,
I would say
there's only two things that could cause me to be wrong on that, in my view, and I don't think either one is people lose so much faith in government to handle things that they talk themselves into a huge funk in this country. And the second thing could be if somehow the troubles of Europe spilled over here.
Confidence is an important thing.
Sure it is.
And there was a damage to confidence based on what happened in Washington.
Charlie, I own stock in a lot of companies. If I get upset about the management, what they're doing, do I lose confidence? Yes. Do I feel different about investing with them? Yes. I mean, you've got to have confidence in your leaders. I mean, we went into World War II with confidence in our leaders. It's vital. It looked like we were losing the war for 6 months, but we never lost confidence in our leaders. And you have to believe in them, and they have to give you reason to believe in them.
Help me understand now what the danger is that we face, if things don't happen as well, if Washington cannot get back on track, maintain the confidence of the American people, and at the same time make the right decisions. Because if that super committee doesn't do the right thing,
that's why I'm telling them to do the right thing. With
but that's why you tell them, this is directed in part to that super committee to say, look, you got to look at taxes really strongly here.
If I can pick 12 readers for it, they're the ones. No, if you go back to September of 2008, I mean, you had a month when everything was falling apart, Freddie, Fannie, hey, you name it. What our leaders were saying to us then, the key players, they were saying, we'll do whatever it takes. And I knew they had the power to do whatever it took, and then I believed they would do it. Now, the problem about government now is that if they come out and get on the Sunday talk shows and say, I'll do whatever it takes, people don't believe them. I mean, they've got to see action. And here they see something like the raising the deficit limit used as a hostage for something so vital importance to the United States. I mean, if you can use it as a hostage in terms of spending, you can use it as a hostage on funding education or anything else. I mean, it isn't limited to that. If you got something that comes up like that, people do not want to see the instruments of government used as weapons. The old idea of the law that it's a shield, not a sword. I mean, the minorities become a sword in this respect. And I don't blame this on Speaker Boehner. I think if he'd
you told the members of the Tea Party and
the people that said people when he went back to him said to him, you're not going to have our support if you go in there and bend an inch on this. They said throw away the steering wheel.
You have also said that you guarantee that there was one way to get people to vote differently on this, which is if you say unless you reduce the deficit to
3% of GDP.
3% of GDP, and it's now about 10%.
Right.
Unless you reduce it, then you are not eligible for re-election.
Yeah.
If you had that facing them, you'd get a decision about these issues right away.
Tomorrow. But it's still tongue-in-cheek, though, Charlie, because during a huge recession like we had, during an all-out wartime period, you don't want them operating with 3% of, I mean, you need larger deficits. But you certainly need something a little less than that on average over time. But I just use it to illustrate that this is a world of incentives.
Right.
And we work on incentives in every way. We work on them in education, in business, every other place. And when I try to think of the incentives to get somebody who comes up for re-election in a year to do something where the policy cycle goes out 5 years or 10 years, how do you do it when the policy cycle exceeds the electoral cycle? You got to make sure the electoral cycle's in the equation.
What else do you want these 12 members of Congress who are sitting on the super committee to think about beyond taxes and a balanced approach, which is also what was recommended by Bowles-Simpson, also recommended by the Gang of Six?
It's incredible. I mean, here you had Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles. You couldn't have two finer people, intelligent, good-humored, on opposite sides of the aisle. They get together and they get Tom Coburn and Dick Durbin to sign on to something. I mean, they worked
a Democrat and a Republican, a liberal Democrat from Illinois, and a conservative Republican from Oklahoma.
Yeah, they were putting their country ahead of their personal feelings, and they worked for months and months and months. They get criticized, and I'm sure the hours they spent arguing over given things that they had to compromise on. And they get 11 out of 18 to agree, and that just gets tossed aside. I think that was a terrible mistake. Simpson Bowles should gain momentum. I mean, when you get people who work like crazy, many months, personal reputations at stake and everything else, and you get Coburn and Durbin. I give credit to both of them. Equal credit. I think I may not agree with Tom Coburn, but I think I think he's a real statesman. Yeah. I think he's a statesman.
And in fact, he was prepared to take reductions in
absolutely
in corporate income tax. There is also this the president's leadership. You have said on most social issues and on distribution of wealth, the president and I are in sync. Yes?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I just mean that in terms of a woman's right to choose, and in terms of not having the rich get by with lower taxes than the people in their office, and there are a bunch of things that I agree with. There's limits to how much you can do and that. But
what about distribution of wealth?
I think that in the last 25 years, the Forbes 400, which is different than the IRS 400, right. Forbes 400 have gone from a couple $100 billion of wealth to $1 trillion or something like that. I mean, you've had the income of the top Americans quintuple top 400 in the last 20 years. This is becoming a nation of of haves and have-nots and super haves. Not the, I don't listen. Anybody makes $250,000. I don't consider them rich, particularly if they live in New York or LA or someplace like that. So
that's why you put the level at $1 million first, and then $10 million second.
Yeah, listen. You want everybody to be able to get ahead in this country, and you want them to be able to enjoy the fruits of what they do.
You like being rich?
Yeah, I've been poor, I've been rich, and rich is better.
But the idea is that.
No. It should be a land of opportunity, and people that get rich, nobody's going to confiscate everything or anything of the sort. But the distribution in this country, market system has led to extremes. A guy that's wired like me, I don't have any special status in this world. I'm a great nurse, a great teacher, maybe much more valuable to society than I am. I'm wired so that I can figure out what things are worth.
Allocate capital.
Yeah, so I get super rich, and somebody whose adenoids are in a certain arrangement gets rich. But television makes a lot of people rich. I mean, Lou Gehrig held out for $25,000 in the late 30s. They benched him. They didn't bench him because he had break in the street, but he had a long struggle. Television has made the 230 hitter or the 240 hitter, better than Ted Williams at 406. So there's a lot of serendipity in this. Everybody in this country owes their good fortune in some way to the rest of the country.
This is your 2010 tax return.
That's my 2010 tax return.
What will I see there?
Well, you'll see a lot of income. You'll see adjusted gross income of about $62 million.
Right.
But then I gave, you're only entitled to deduct 30% of your contribution. I gave away a lot. So I've got a charitable carry forward of about $10 billion. I don't think I'm going to use it up. But then you get to taxable income, and I've got 39.8 million, and then you get down to tax, and I got 6.9 million. And
that comes to what percent of taxable income?
I think it comes to 17.4.
17%.
I added
and
in
other people in your office are paying an average
between
of 36%.
36, 33 to 41. Nobody's below 33. Nobody's below 33. I think
how much of that has to do with the payroll tax?
Well, a lot, because they all pay it. I pay it incidentally, but it's $15,000 for me. $15,300. And it's $15,300 for all the people in the office pretty much. And many of them have spouses where it's another $15,300 for the spouse. So with some of them it's $30,000. And that's a lot of money to them, a lot.
And you said you want the 12 most important people can read this so the people in Congress who are on the CEPA committee. What else can be done to give it leg?
Well, I hope the Times is a launching pad. I think that it's a subject worth serious discussion. I already heard from somebody this morning that they're putting on Facebook. I never thought of social media as being a way to
they're putting this column on Facebook so we get a wider and a different distribution.
Yeah.
The 600 million.
I think if the public is educated on what goes on, I think their representatives will follow through to some extent. I think some members of Congress don't even understand that, probably. I invite them to take their own tax return, and make the same calculation I did. And incidentally, I don't have a tax shelter. I've never had a tax shelter. I don't drill for oil. I don't do any of that kind of stuff. The Congress has been my tax advisor. I mean, they're taking care of me.
You also make the point that in so many corporations that their biggest investment is not in plants and equipment, it's in lobbyists in Washington. So therefore they get deductions so that their effective tax rate is also much less whatever the maximum corporate tax rate is.
Yeah, well, that's true, and they're entitled, incidentally, to try and, I mean, there is a big rule book up there, and if the rule book's got flaws in it, the thing to do is to change the rule book, not count on everybody being on the honor system. I mean, the rule book is what counts, and I'm probably creating a lot of a business for the lobbyists now, because they'll be very busy defending the present situation. But I think it's the rule book that has to be looked at.
Do we need tax reform?
Yeah, I think so. But I think I would cure what I wrote about in the New York Times this morning first. That's very easy to do.
Do those two things.
And that doesn't solve everything, Charlie. I mean,
and it would go ahead.
It probably it would be $50 billion a year. Now everybody talks in terms of 10 years now, so it'd be $500 billion over 10 years. But this doesn't close the gap. I want to move up toward that 18.5 or 19, and I hope we get a lot of it out of growth. But I think it's kind of silly at this point to count entirely on that. And I think we've got to move the expenditures down to 21 or thereabouts %.
How do you measure President Obama's leadership on this? Because he could have done more to be in support of Simpson Bowles.
Yeah, I
and
wish
he could have been out earlier.
I wish he'd been. I wish he had. Both sides were afraid to touch Simpson Bowles. I mean, that's pretty clear. I mean, it made too much sense. They didn't want to be associated with it. I would say this, though, in terms of the deficit limit negotiations, when the other guy throws the steering wheel out the window, you've got a problem. I mean, if you and I get in those cars and I see you throw the steering wheel out, I give up. You win.
Yeah, in fact, when you looked at the Republican debate the other night, and they asked them to raise their hand if you were in favor, of a level of spending cuts which were
10 for 1.
10 for 1.
10 for 1. I mean,
and everybody would not go for that.
That
if
was,
it was 10
that was
to
pathetic.
1.
That was pathetic. I mean, listen, I like Republicans. I mean, if you got Democrats on some core issue to them, they'd probably do something just as silly. But when they take that attitude, they are really saying, I want to win this primary. They are saying that the country be damned, I want to win this primary.
And it means that a certain element of a philosophy on taxation has taken control of the public debate within that party.
It has, particularly in terms of the primary, because the primaries push people to extremes. That's one of the problems we have in this country. But they can't believe in their hearts, all 10 of them, that a 10 for 1 ratio would in some way irreparably harm the country.
But you said you're prepared to make, as I raised earlier in this conversation, specific spending cuts and entitlements, changing Social Security, trying to reduce the cost of health care, which is essential.
Charlie, on my tax return here, you had George Will on a few days ago,
right.
And George said he couldn't understand why he was getting Social Security. Here it is. Social Security benefits, $32,680.
You get $32,000.
$32,680.
Right.
And
you
even
don't need it.
a portion of it's tax-free, not a very big portion in my case. But
So you make it means test.
Oh,
in a second.
I mean, I think the idea when we've got this very, very rich family in this country, a lot of us have troubles. 60 million people live in households where the income is $21,000 a year or less. And I say to people who say, we shouldn't raise taxes, just try that for a few weeks. I mean, just try it. So I think that when we're going to have to do things that are even a little bit tough on them, maybe, I think you've got to come after some of us, and it certainly shouldn't be giving me Social Security. It's deposited in my bank account every month without me even knowing about it.
Where does this populist instinct in you come from?
I was born lucky. I was born in the United States of America. The odds were at least 30 to 1 against that. I didn't have anything to do with that. I was born wired for capitalization. I didn't have anything to do with that. So here I am. I won the ovarian lottery the day I was born. A lot of people don't. They go off to Afghanistan and fight for us to preserve things for me. I mean, when some of my friends complain about their taxes, I feel like saying, let's continue this conversation on the shores of Normandy. Let's just go over there and we'll just talk about this. How terrible your situation is. And I really think this country works wonderfully on a market system. And we don't want to give it up. We have to control that market system in many ways, but it works. It works with the kind of incentives we have. It works with equality of opportunity. It's not perfect, but we've tried it. We've tried for it over the time. But the lucky ones still prosper incredibly disproportionately, under this. I'm not for having some kind of a czar and Washington decides what's proper for everybody, but I do think something that thinks about the 60 million people that are living at $21,000 a year or less in their household. I think a rich society should think about them a little bit every day.
That's the America you believe in.
Yeah, it is. I think it's the America most people believe in.
Are you okay by Dodd-Frank, that in fact that was the appropriate reform to do?
I haven't read it, Charlie. I think that there's two things that are needed to keep the financial system from going crazy. One is keeping some limits on leverage, and we didn't do a very good job of that last time. And incidentally,
well, Dodd-Frank's devoted to that a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah, but Congress, they encouraged huge leverage in Fannie and Freddie. I mean, that's where the money was. The second thing is having the proper incentives for people at the top of important financial institutions. We saw institution after institution go to the government and say, we're too important to society that you can't let us fail. So pour in the money, do whatever is necessary, and meanwhile, I'm going to go off and be rich. The guys have screwed it up. I think you've got to have downside, really drastic downside, for the people that run financial institutions, big ones that get into trouble. And we need those incentives, and I don't think they've attacked that yet. That can be done through the board of directors.
But too big to fail continues to exist.
Too big to fail will always exist. There will always be institutions that are too big to fail.
Should
They're deciding over in Europe that Greece is too big to fail.
Okay, but should they be broken up? I know that.
Yeah.
Should those institutions be broken up?
No.
As one form of Federal Reserve?
We decided the whole banking system's too big to fail when we put in the FDIC in effect.
Right,
I mean, we can't exist without them. But we have to do something to change the behavior of people that are at the top of those institutions, so they have huge downside. They didn't have downside. You know, people. I'm not going to name names, but those people did not have downside. They had downside to their reputation, but they walked away with tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So you can't have that kind of a situation exist and expect great behavior. And then you have to have some restrictions on leverage.
But has that changed?
The incentives have not changed very much. They say they've changed by paying them more in stock and all that, but that isn't draconian enough for me.
All right. I want to come back to Omaha.
Great.
Yeah, I know. But and look at just what the lessons of Berkshire Hathaway are for you. I mean, most of your businesses are growing.
Yeah.
Railroad's growing.
Everything's growing.
Everything's growing.
Pretty much. Mm-hmm.
You are finding that you need to hire new people?
Sure. We're investing a record $7 billion this year in capital investment, almost all of which is in the United States. That's at least $1 billion more than we've ever invested in the past. There's plenty of things to do here.
You have often said that, I mean, in a time like this, in which there are difficult times, that's the best time for you because you can have more opportunities to buy things that you think are of quality at better prices.
There's no question about it. I like buying on sale. But, last Monday, we spent more money in the stock market buying than any day this year. You know, but it was
buying stock.
Buying stocks, not business. But buying business is very infrequent. I mean, there's a lot of happenstance in that, but you got to be ready to do it.
There's much discussion in the paper about buying another acquisition of Transatlantic, I think it is.
Yeah,
an insurance company.
We made an offer about a week ago. That offer's expired now.
So that's
we don't leave things out.
And you don't like bidding wars either.
No.
All right. But if you look at Berkshire today, it's different in the sense that more of it is owning businesses 100% than it is owning stock.
And we've been going that direction for 20 years, but people are seeing more and more evidence of it. But we employ 260,000 people or more, and we have added to employment this year. And
with the exception of homes and construction.
Yeah, we're getting
and carpet and all those businesses.
Yeah, everything associated with it.
Second largest real estate agent and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the one thing. So Berkshire, in a sense, offers an opportunity to look at where the U.S. economic growth is.
I can tell you how many people had dilly bars yesterday. Everything from dilly bars to corporate aircraft.
Robert Zoellick, the president of the World Bank, said, "This is a very, very internationally is a difficult time, and because what's happening in the United States and in Europe could very well be a warning sign." You seem to say, look, my success of my companies is different, except for construction and houses.
The United States has been improving. I mean, it went through, we talked about it, was economic Pearl Harbor. Right. I mean, I used that term. And we had a shock to our system that was really colossal. I mean, and a few people hadn't acted right, even more so. But we have been coming back steadily. The mood has gone up and down more like this as we've gone, but everything I see in business is we've been coming back steadily since the summer of 2009, and that continuing, right up through last month. Now, can something happen that will interrupt that? Perhaps, but I haven't seen it. Europe is a different story.
Okay, but put Europe in the context of this, though. I mean, how could the sovereign debt crisis in Europe affect the rest of us?
Well, the problem is I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen over there. I know 17 countries that joined the European Monetary Union gave up the right to print their own money. That was a huge, huge decision. I hope the United States never does it. I mean, it changes the game.
To be control of your own finances, in fact.
Yeah, and they linked themselves. They gave each other their credit cards and said, let's all go out. And some behave better than others, or worse than others.
Should they dismantle the Eurozone?
I don't know how. I mean, it's very complicated. I mean, you've got to decide one of two things. You've either got to decide that these members are actually going to get their act together, the ones that have troubles, in a very major way, because they need lots of money. I mean, they have to refund their old obligations all the time. So nobody has to lend money to country A, B, or C. I mean, in the end, nobody has to lend money to them. The United States, if nobody lends money to the United States, we print it. But not over there. I mean, if Greece owed their money in drachma, they'd have a lot of inflation and devalue and all of that, but they wouldn't have a problem paying their bonds. They gave up that right. Now, either the weaker countries get their act together in some major way, and I think that's very, very difficult, or basically the very strong companies, and we're talking countries, we're talking Germany, have to say, I'm willing to take care of my brother-in-law that's been using my credit card.
Yeah. Well, that's what they've said so far.
Well, they've sort of half said it. I mean, that's their problem. I mean, if you're having a run at a bank and you got 10 people in front of it, no FDIC insurance, that line's not going to stay at 10. You're either going to get rid of those 10 or you're going to have 100. And so far in Europe, they've sort of kept talking to the 10, and a few more straggled up. And so they didn't get rid of the line. And when there's a run, the line only gets longer unless it gets taken care of very quickly.
But what are the consequences for the United States and for Asia? I
don't know the answer to that. I don't think they're necessarily extremely dire. There's got to be consequences, but Europe won't go away. I mean, we're selling a lot of goods in Europe. And our
it's a huge market.
Oh, it's a huge market, and they're not going to go away, and the plants aren't going to go away, and the farmland isn't going to go away. It's just going to be kind of an economic mess for a while.
You have said before that to me and to others that Berkshire is your canvas that you paint on. It's your masterpiece.
Well, I don't know about masterpiece, but it's my canvas.
So what is it that, if you look at it today, Berkshire, you find fault with?
Find fault with?
Yeah.
Well, I made plenty of mistakes along the way, so I've got a lot of brush strokes out there that if I just give me a little whatever it takes to remove that, I would do it. So I made plenty of mistakes, but I expect to make mistakes, and I'll keep making mistakes. So,
because unless you take chances, you won't make mistakes.
Oh, sure, and mistakes are part of the game. I mean, you're swinging at pitches, and you miss a few. But no, I don't want to sound. I feel good about Berkshire. I mean, the people I'm associated with, the businesses, we have we lay out our economic principles, and I laid them out many, many years ago, and we don't change them. I mean, we try to operate that way. Doesn't mean we're perfection. You got a company of 260,000 people. I'll guarantee you right now somebody's doing something I wish they weren't. I mean, you can't have a city of 260,000 people and have no jails. But overall, I feel there's a culture that I don't think any other really large public company has, and I think it's enduring because it's so inculcated in the managers, the shareholders, the directors, everybody. So I feel good about Berkshire.
Would I be wrong to suggest the thing you worry most about is whether after you are gone that culture remains as it is, that you have in a sense made Berkshire strong enough to exist without you?
Yeah, I don't worry about that. I worried about it over the years, which is why I did a bunch of things that I think ensure that future. But that's always the question. I mean, you've seen all kinds of great companies topple for one reason.
You once said to me and to others, you have to make your company idiot-proof because at some point some idiot will run it.
Yeah, well, that may be even the case now. I mean,
but if someone has said, I think that the thing you worry most about is whether Berkshire will be intact 20 years after you're dead.
Well, I don't worry about it, but I care about it. Yeah, no, and since I care about it, I've put things in place which I think almost ensure that Berkshire will be a lot better 20 years after I'm gone than it is now.
Where is succession today?
Where's succession?
Yeah.
If I die tonight, tomorrow morning it won't take the board an hour to have announced
who the
my
new
successor.
CEO is.
Absolutely. They know exactly who it is, and they agree.
But it may change 6 months from now.
It's unlikely to change 6 months from now, but it could. I mean, that person could die.
Is there a list of people or one person?
There's several people, but there's one person they've all agreed on.
Takes over CEO.
Yeah, and there should be. I mean, there's no reason to have the board of directors start thinking about who the CEO should be the day after the present CEO leaves. I mean, they've neglected their job if they do that.
Was the Sokol affair the thing that caused you most angst because it had to do with judgment of?
Well, it caused angst. Yeah, I don't know whether it's the most in my business life, but it was up there.
Yeah. When you think about whatever legacy there is, your legacy is Berkshire Hathaway beyond family and philanthropy.
Yeah. Well, I'll settle for those.
You quoted Christopher Wren, Sir Christopher Wren, who I think created St. Paul's Cathedral.
That's right. He's buried there too.
And if you go there, the epitaph he has written for himself is?
I'll paraphrase it maybe a little, but if you seek my monument, look about you. And I say that's the way we should think about this country. I mean, this country is a monument to what was done a few hundred years ago and the people that have followed. I mean, it's incredible. Just think if you back in 1790, you say, I want to create a monument to this new country I'm giving you. And you'd envisioned the country of 2011. I don't think anybody would have dreamt big enough. You know, I mean, this is something to, and so I just, you know, when I fly across the country or that thought occurs to me that if you really seek this country's monument, if you seek our founding fathers' monument, just look around you.
And you worry today that there's some threat to that. Not because the system is not right, not because the system is not strong enough, but you worry that there are things happening that will make it less great if they are not addressed.
I think we're being tested, Charlie, yes. But we were tested in the Civil War. We were tested, you know, in the Depression. We were tested, you know, December 7th of 41. We were tested on September 11th of 2000. I mean, we will get tests, and this is one of them. We'll surmount them, but I would just as soon get on with the job of surmounting them now.